Here is your horror story. The Last House on Whitmore Road. Nobody in the town of Harlow Creek talked about the house at the end of Whitmore Road. Not openly, anyway. You might catch the older folks glancing sideways when you mentioned it, or notice how the children always crossed to the other side of the street when they rode their bikes past the rusted iron gate. The house had been standing there for over 100 years at the very edge of town where the paved road turned to gravel and the gravel turned to dirt, and the dirt disappeared into the thick black woods that nobody ever entered after dark. It was a Victorian house, tall and narrow, with broken windows on the upper floors that looked like hollow eyes staring down at the road. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wooden walls gray and cracked and rotting slowly in the damp air. The front porch sagged in the middle, and the front door, which was always slightly ajar no matter how many times the town authorities nailed it shut, creaked endlessly in the wind like something breathing. People said a family had died in that house. Not just died, but vanished. The Whitmore family back in 1923. Father, mother, 3 children, and the grandmother who lived in the attic room. One morning, they were simply gone. No bodies were ever found. No explanation was ever given. The neighbors reported hearing screaming in the night, but when the sheriff arrived at dawn, the house was empty and cold. Every lamp extinguished, every clock stopped at exactly 3:14 in the morning. The breakfast dishes were still on the table. The food was still warm. After that, nobody lived in the house for long. A couple from Boston tried in 1947, lasted 4 days before they drove away in the middle of the night, leaving everything they owned behind them. A young man named Gerald Foote moved in during the summer of 1961, told everyone he was going to fix the place up and sell it for a profit. They found him sitting in the kitchen 3 weeks later, rocking back and forth in a chair, staring at the wall, completely unable to speak. He never recovered. He spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility in Vermont, and on the rare occasions when the nurses could get him to talk, he said only one thing, over and over again. He said, "She is still in there. She never left." Nobody knew who he meant. By the time Daniel Marsh arrived in Harlow Creek in October 2019, the house had been empty for decades. Daniel was 34 years old, recently divorced, recently fired from his architecture firm in Chicago, and deeply, profoundly tired of his own life. He had grown up reading about haunted houses, loved horror movies, considered himself a rational man who did not believe in ghosts or curses or things that went bump in the night. When he saw the listing online, an old Victorian house on a large plot of land in rural New Hampshire for an almost impossibly low price, he felt something shift inside his chest. He felt, for the first time in months, genuinely interested in something. He drove up on a Thursday afternoon in late October when the leaves had already fallen and the trees stood bare and black against a white sky. He found Harlow Creek easily enough, a small town with a gas station, a diner, a post office, and a hardware store, the kind of place that felt like it existed slightly outside of normal time. He stopped at the diner to get directions to Whitmore Road, and the woman behind the counter, a heavy-set woman in her 60s with kind eyes, set down her coffee pot very slowly when he told her the address. She said, "You are not actually planning to go inside that house, are you?" Daniel smiled and said he was actually planning to buy it. The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then she poured his coffee without another word. As he was leaving, she called after him. She said, "People who sleep in that house hear things, and once you hear it, it does not stop. Even after you leave, even years later, you keep hearing it. Just so you know." Daniel thanked her politely and drove on. Whitmore Road was exactly as lonely and desolate as the listing photos had suggested. The trees on either side of the road were enormous, their bare branches interlocking overhead like the fingers of two hands folded together in prayer. His headlights swept across the rusted gate, and he pulled over and got out of his car and stood there in the cold evening air, looking up at the house. It was even bigger than he had imagined, 4 stories tall, with a round tower room on the left side and a long wraparound porch that had partially collapsed. Every window was dark. The front door was slightly open, just an inch or two, and the wind moved through it, making a low, hollow sound that Daniel told himself was just the wind and nothing else. He had brought a flashlight, a sleeping bag, a cooler of food, and a bottle of bourbon. He was going to spend the night and make his decision in the morning. That was the plan. He pushed open the gate, which screamed on its hinges, and walked up the cracked stone path to the front door. He pushed it wider and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, damp wood and something else underneath it, like flowers left in a vase too long after they had died. He swept his flashlight around the entrance hall and saw a wide staircase rising into darkness, faded wallpaper peeling from the walls in long strips, a broken chandelier hanging overhead with most of its crystals missing. The floor was thick with dust, and as he moved through it, he noticed something that made him stop. There were footprints in the dust, small ones like a child's, leading from the bottom of the staircase to the hallway that ran deeper into the house. They were not dusty, they were fresh. Daniel stood very still for a moment. He told himself an animal had gotten inside, a raccoon maybe, or a fox. He followed his flashlight beam down the hallway and found the kitchen, which was large and old-fashioned, with a wood-burning stove and a long oak table. The breakfast dishes were still there. He had read about this in the old news articles he found online before his trip, but seeing them in person was different. Plates and cups and a glass pitcher, all coated in nearly a century of dust, all still arranged as though someone had simply stepped away from the table for a moment and would be right back. He set up his sleeping bag in the front sitting room, which seemed structurally the most sound. He ate a sandwich and drank some bourbon and read on his phone until the battery started getting low. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the house groaned around him constantly, the old wood settling and shifting in the cold. He turned off his flashlight to save the battery and lay in the dark, listening. The darkness was absolute. He could not see his hand before his face. He fell asleep sometime around midnight. He didn't know the time right away, but he checked his phone later, and it was 3:14 exactly. He woke up because of the sound. It was a singing sound, coming from directly above him, from somewhere on the second floor. A woman's voice, very soft, humming a melody he did not recognize, slow and wavering and slightly off-key, the way a person sounds when they are humming to themselves without realizing anyone can hear them. It was the most natural sound in the world, and it was the most terrifying sound Daniel had ever heard in his life, because it was 3 in the morning in an empty house that had been abandoned for decades, and there was someone upstairs singing. He lay completely still for what felt like a very long time. The humming continued, slow and patient and utterly unconcerned. He told himself he had imagined it. He told himself it was the wind in the pipes or the walls or something structural settling in the cold night air. He closed his eyes